Hmm.
All quiet on the Western Front, Joe.
It is?
Yes, everything is going fine.
Well, that's what that means. Everything's going fine.
Kind of. It's a reference to a World War One book, a book about the war by a veteran. It's gone down as kind of an anti-war narrative.
A German.
A German vet wrote a fictional book by that title. That's the English title that was given it. That was the kind of dark irony that, permeates the book, in which right at the late stages of the war, even the messaging from officialdom out to the people is it's fine,
Everything's
all quiet. Nothing really happened today.
Yeah.
So I suppose
Right before catastrophe strikes.
right before, calamity for Germany, but not just for Germany, but especially Germany.
So you're suggesting that's what's going on in the world today?
Well, it's kind of like, I suppose I had two things in mind when I thought of it. One was nothing much happened this week, in the week that was. Nothing new, nothing major. We're not here to, talk about any one subject in any great detail because, we're just looking around and it's quiet. It's midsummer, I suppose, in the Northern Hemisphere, so maybe that's to be expected.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like, there's so much happening.
That people have normalized.
But that people have normalized, or that the narrative, not just official narrative making, but that, like you said, people themselves kind of incorporate into, well, things are still reasonably good. I'm going on my summer holidays, Nothing's quite collapsed yet, But I suppose this time is, everyone knows though, at the same time, when they remind themselves, this time is as fractious and fraught with the same kinds of dangers as that inflection point in history. Along with others, we're not quite there yet, but Berlin bunker just before the end in 1945 is kind of, we're seeing signs of that coming up too. Certainly in the Western capitals.
Yeah.
That's not imminent, but whichever way you look at it, and it's the current situation is no one disagrees that this is historical, and there are many comparisons that can be made, with our time with
Other times.
other calamities.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know. The biggest calamity, at least in the UK this week, seems to be the weather. It's obviously, as all weather is, it's associated with man-made climate change. But it's, the media, the Western, British media in particular, have been, other media as well, but the British media in particular have been kind of lampooned, at least on social media, for the reporting of this kind of hot spell that the UK is going through. It hasn't really even begun. So it kind of started yesterday, more or less, and it's going to extend for a couple of days. And just throw that up there, Scotty. This is the former chief scientist in the UK, and it's just an example. So it's not just the media spitballing like the gutter press or whatever. This guy is apparently saying that because it might reach 40 degrees tomorrow, probably won't, but in the high 30s for one day, basically. That up to 10,000, there may be 10,000 excess deaths as a result. Now, that seems a bit, bit over the top. But, and of course, there's been lots of reports over the past week about this oncoming catastrophic global warming created heat wave in the UK that's going to, and people have been warned to stay indoors and don't go to work in case you just, in case you collapse, Another example is this one, which is, it's gets a bit more into the medical reasons for deaths, I suppose. This one from the Telegraph says that your blood thickens and then clots. That's what extreme heat can do to your body. Now, people have been paying attention. That word clot might stand out about blood clots and stuff. That's been in the news over the past couple of years, although seriously downplayed, unlike this, where you take you know, like basically the media talks openly and loudly about the sun causing blood clots
Right.
when that really has never been a thing before. I mean, it may actually be technically true, but it's certainly not something you'd want to, or you'd feel you have to warn the entire population about. Stay out of the sun, or you might get deadly blood clots. Whereas, of course, there have been reports about right from the get-go, really, within a couple of weeks or a couple of months at least, of the AstraZeneca vaccine. In fact, it was kind of recalled, or it was not used by several European countries because the AstraZeneca vaccine was shown to be causing blood clots in a disproportionately large, for vaccines, number of people. So, yeah.
Okay. Well,
That's one disaster anyway, according to the media and the government. Again, it's not just the media, it's the government itself and government scientists and stuff, or former government scientists saying, warning that the heat will kill you. Stay indoors. It just stands out. Like I said, it's being lampooned on social media because it's so over the top, you know?
Yeah.
People are like, it's summertime. Okay.
Yeah.
It got hot 2 years ago, like 2019 was a hot year in the UK as well, or a hot summer, you know? So.
okay. So in staying with the UK, the other major topic there this week is the who will replace Boris Johnson as nominated and voted for, elected, whatever, leader of the Conservative Party, this Prime Minister. So if you take both, the implicit message then of these kinds of headlines about the heat, which is current and, you know, it's just weather at the end of the day. Right now, in this context, it's just weather. Plus, who's going to replace Boris? It's like the message is that the overall message is all is quiet. In this case, on the home front.
Yeah.
Nothing big going on. But in actuality, there's a serious problem in there as everywhere else. There's a major inflation issue.
Right.
And, you know, they're going to go from 1 million or so to several million people just this year needing food banks to survive this winter.
Yeah.
So all is quiet in the Western Front at these narrative levels, but it is not all quiet. It's just like alarm bells, you know, ringing all over the place.
Yeah, and people know it, but again, people, I suppose, are kind of, I don't know, they've normalized it, or they're just kind of quietly saying, well, we'll just have to somehow get along. I mean, you mentioned Germany at the beginning of the show, or because of that phrase, all quiet in the Western Front. I mean, it's been in the news already about this winter, possible energy shortages and people having problems heating their homes. I mean, it was a few months ago, even that the German government started advising people to get around to make, you know, use little tea lights or something and an upturned flower pot to stay warm and stuff. And then they haven't let up. Obviously, this will keep going, and it'll probably continue to increase in its, you know, the signal and stuff. But this one is just from a couple of days ago. Germans will have to burn wood to stay warm this winter, warns Deutsche Bank. So you have the bank warning, the bank warning you about. Of course, the bank, I suppose, is directly related because it's going to be people. It's kind of like the banks are saying, you know, we're at the front end of this. People are going to be probably asking us for money to pay for either extremely inflated gas prices to heat their homes, or it'll be unavailable. So the advice from the bank is just burn some wood, you know. So yeah, that's another example. People are well aware of it, and there's other stories about people would have done, not polls, but they've gone around with questionnaires asking people in Germany what they think about the whole situation, and they say, well, you know, we'll just make do, you know, we'll stiff up our lip. The Germans stiff up our lip. So people are aware of like you said, of that there are serious problems, but I don't know. There's a narrative, and what do they do about it anyway, you know?
Well, it's interesting that the two first items you showed, one of them had a keyword in it, excess deaths. The other one had a keyword in it, clots. The reasons they gave for both are, well, it's hot, and, well, yeah, it's just too hot. Yeah, in both cases, the weather's fault. But, you know, it speaks to something that is an underlying, ongoing issue reported by your man, Dr. John,
Campbell, yeah.
Dr. Campbell. He pointed out using ONS British Office of National Statistics data last week that there is a probably global, he surmised, increase in excess deaths, excess mortality at this time.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
So
it's the climate's fault. It's too hot. That's just maybe I'm just connecting something there that
Well, it's
people are invited. What I'm getting at is
Yeah,
people are
it's-
invited to go. Everything's fine, but if it's not quite fine and I have a little discomfort, well, here's a possible reason. Like, oh, I'll go with that. Okay, fine. That's what they're being invited to assuage this because it's causing stress.
Well,
it's
it's
causing
another
mass stress. in
it's
people.
another narrative. Although a lot of people, I think, because the vast majority of people are vaccinated. If you imagine yourself, if you're a person who's been vaccinated, you're going to be reluctant to even look at any or seriously entertain, or even I'd say talk about any data or any information, that's reliable information that vaccines are maybe behind an increase to some extent, an increase in excess deaths. Are you going to want to go there?
No.
Are you going to want to tell your friends about it? Hey, you know the vaccine I got? It looks like it might be actually causing excess. It didn't bother me, but it may be causing excess deaths in certain groups of people, whatever. So yeah, I mean, it's a narrative in a certain sense. It's weird to see that put out there. The talk of the heat killing people, or there's been loads of other. I've posted a bunch of them on Facebook over the past couple of months almost, where there's just this repeated series of different things that can give you heart attacks.
Yeah.
It was like 7 or 8 different.
Gardening is a recent one.
Gardening, too much gardening, a bunch of other things. But they were kind of almost. They looked like they might be, like made up memes.
Yeah.
But then some of them were, but a lot of them were not. Where they were, and it's weird where it's coming out. I don't know. I mean, you'd have to. It's maybe looking for a conspiracy where there is none, but it's a strange coincidence of the two things. We have excess deaths above the normal from, say, excess heart attacks, excess cancers, excess or incidence of blood clots and stuff. And the only thing that information is put out there to explain those, even though that's not in the public awareness yet. The majority of people out there aren't aware that there is excess deaths, right? But what they are, because that's not being publicized very, very widely. But what they are getting is an explanation. If that ever comes to light, what seems to be that they're getting an explanation that if it ever comes to light that there's an increase in deaths or it becomes widely known or widely published, they will have had this series of news articles telling them all these different weird reasons why you might die or people might be dying from things that you never thought they died from before, like heart attack from gardening, and heat killing, giving people blood clots, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting observation, and I suppose we'll have to see. We'll have to see, but just did I send? Yeah,
I don't have it to hand. You've probably seen. People noticed. I saw 2 instances of it actually. First, someone did a side-by-side comparison of British reporting on a weather forecast of the map
Yeah.
of Britain and Ireland with old school graphics
Yeah,
from maybe the 90s.
yeah,
And the similar kind of range of temperatures that the UK
Right.
is seeing now, side by side with modern graphics.
Yeah.
So it was sunny, and just sunny,
Yeah.
maybe a little orange,
yeah,
and images, graphics of the sun and the temperature range given
yeah.
20 years ago versus today where the country's like red to
Yeah.
black,
Red is the new yellow. Yeah.
But they show the figures and it's the same range of temperatures, but
Mhm.
it's like this time it's terrible.
Well, that puts me in mind of the whole.
And then later I saw separately someone had done the same with either French or German graphics used today.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's like red danger. I don't know. Is it expressing something in people in the collective psyche or something? I mean, but you'd have to go back. What it puts me in mind of is going back a long time when they developed the terror threat alert.
Yeah.
So, it's something weird in Western society where they started using this band of warnings. They started to warn people about things that were a threat to their life, and they used. I mean, it's not unusual that you use red down from green to red. Right, green is like basically it's as old as a traffic light, I suppose, or even older.
Right.
Right, green is fine, everything's cool, calm. Go ahead, red, stop, danger. So it's not unusual that they use those colors. It's just the way that they're using them,
Yeah.
and what
Across
they're
so
using,
many things.
and what they're using them for.
Hmm.
Yeah. But just on sticking with the stats, the excess deaths. This is from it's actually GBN News.
Yeah, it's like a new
Yeah,
channel in the UK.
yeah.
It's not shown on regular TV. People can only get on
I
satellite.
think it might only be satellite or the internet. But again, people, a lot more people, at least for some things, a lot more people are watching the internet than they are watching their TV.
Right.
This is just an interview they did with a guy who was used to, but has left since. But not long ago, very recently, he was worked at the Office of National Statistics in the UK. We'll just listen to a little bit of it.
Here's a point I made en passant the other night, but it bears repeating. For many Western nations, early 2022 has seen a catastrophic drop-off in baby births. Germany already has deathbed demographics, but 2022 so far is a unique scale of disaster. Look at this on the right-hand end of the graph. That's the way it's gone down as opposed to the same period in previous years. Same thing in Switzerland. Let's take a look at the Swiss graph here. Again, see the same thing. Equivalent period in other years, it's significantly lower. Same thing in Norway. First quarter Norway births 2018, 15,000 plus, 2019 15,000 plus, 2020 15,000 plus, 2021 15,000 plus, 2022 12,000. What could cause such a drop-off? Well, it happened in all these countries basically 9 months after the rollout of the COVID vaccine. Oh! Don't go there, girlfriend. You sound like one of them conspiracy nutters. By contrast, just as the maternity wards are emptying out, the mortuaries are getting a little crowded with what they call excess deaths, and not from COVID. When we want to run the numbers, we turn to Jamie Jenkins, formerly of the Office for National Statistics. Jamie, excess deaths, is it a thing or not?
Well, Mark, it is a thing at the moment, and we talked briefly on it last week where we had the May figures from the ONS, and we could see that deaths were running above average, and that's when you take out all the deaths that the medical practitioner had said that COVID was a part of it. And the latest figures that we've got for June now in the last week, we've seen about 10,844 deaths across England and Wales. And if we compare how many you would expect to see in this week by looking at similar weeks over the period, say, before the pandemic, that's about 1,427 above average. Now, we know that there are still some deaths happening in society which are related to COVID. We had 161 out of those 10,008 in terms of the deaths that were due to COVID, and a few about 103 where COVID was mentioned on the list here. So we stripped those out. We've still got, Mark, 1,160 deaths in 1 week alone now, in the latest week in England and Wales, above average, which cannot be explained by anything related to COVID. And the thing is, we've got lots of the mainstream media talking about rising infection rates across England and Wales at the moment, and we know that with this new Omicron variant, they're far less deadly, but it's plastered all over the news. We had Jonathan Van Tam interviewed on the BBC on the week a few days ago talking about these new figures. He was saying, no alarm, he still doesn't wear masks, but nobody's really talking about these excess deaths. We were talking about excess deaths when we were seeing them because of COVID, but it's just as important when you've got these excess deaths for other factors. Now, the ONS, when they publish the weekly figures, don't look at it in terms of cause, but we will get a bit more insight into these, like we did for the May figures. In about a month's time, we'll get a bit more insight in terms of the June figures, and it was heart disease was one of the factors in May. And is it a case of what we touched on last week, Mark, that staying home, protecting the NHS has meant that you've not protected yourself, and we're seeing people dying of other causes because of these long waiting lists and people not getting diagnosed with certain conditions?
Well, as
Okay, we'll leave it there.
statisticians
We'll go on. We'll leave the link. It's not that much longer, but you can, if people want to watch more of it. But yeah, he mentions deaths, excess deaths, about 1,400 or so, 1,400 per week, excess deaths over and above the normal. And he was saying that we don't have, at this point they don't have details of what those deaths are. You'll have, it takes a while for them to parse all that data and that kind of stuff, or maybe they parse it in a particular way. Who knows? But
He still offered a suggestion, though, as did Dr. John Campbell.
right,
It's the backlog of missed screenings
right,
from lockdowns.
yes, missed screenings for cancer and on other serious illnesses. Yeah, so it was massive. Of course, that's always going to be a debate. People will say, "Well, that was worth it because so many more people would have died."
Yeah.
Blah 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 blah. But that's
Or
that's
we
an
didn't know, we know now.
Yeah, blah blah blah. Yeah, except
The thing is, it's still only a statistical interest.
yeah,
Not that 2 years ago they would have screamed at me for saying, "How dare you say that about those 1,400 and something people?" But now,
Yeah.
now that we're back to the old normality, and it's not, the hysteria is calmed down. I can say that, and people go, "Oh yeah, well yeah, it's interesting," but it's still at the margins.
yeah,
And they can debate it away or argue the numbers. But yeah,
Well, he mentioned births as well have dropped significantly in several different countries, and that's that's something that's been noticed by, well, it's obviously been noticed by a lot of different people. It's noticed by government agencies in those countries and all that kind of stuff, but they don't make too much of a deal about it. But if we just put up those two images I just sent that are screen grabs of articles, the first one is back in 2021, and this was I think that's the Guardian. Anyway, or yeah. No data linking COVID vaccines to menstrual changes. Now, if you remember, there was a big thing at the time where it was claimed that, the COVID vaccines were having an impact on both women's periods and also sperm counts. Now, we talked about sperm counts last week, I think, and didn't we? And we showed that, or maybe it was the week before. Anyway, recently we talked about sperm counts and studies showing that they do drop off. A few weeks ago,
yeah, from Israel.
showed that they drop off and kind of stayed low actually for quite a long time after COVID vaccines. That's a kind of peer-reviewed study that we talked about, and this one, but so that's more recent. But this was, it was talked about in terms of women's periods and stuff, and that was having there were all sorts of reports of women having more heavy bleeding, missing periods, miscarriages, etc., and that was poo-pooed by. This is one example of the way that the media and governments poo-pooed it, dismissed it. And
Last year.
experts, one unusual period, no cause for alarm, blah blah blah. We'll just throw up the next one, which is more recently. You get this: COVID menstrual changes after COVID vaccines may be far more common than previously known and previously summarily dismissed by the media and governments just a year ago. New study found that 42% of people with regular menstrual cycles said they had bled more heavily than usual after their COVID vaccination. So, I think it's at this point you're allowed, given that we're citing peer-reviewed studies, media and government data, and valid, by anyone's standards, I suppose, valid information. I think it's reasonable to say now that COVID vaccines do have come with a risk, a health risk, a significant health risk that was unheard of for any other vaccines that people have taken in the past, that have been distributed widely among the population. That this has never happened before. So people who over the past couple of years have been talking about this and have been banned from social media and criticised and lambasted for saying so are being proven correct, that COVID vaccines do come with a risk, and it's yet to be seen. Someone would have to do a study, I suppose, to see whether the risk from the COVID vaccine is greater than the risk from not getting the COVID vaccine and just dealing with COVID by your own, that archaic thing. What's it called again? Your own, what's that word? Immune? What's that second? What is it?
It's an immune immune system.
That's it. That
System.
thing, yeah. Your natural
Well-
natural immunity, yeah. That was
Well-
roundly. I think it went away actually over a period
Let's
of
be
time.
careful now. I remember reading that the science said that that's a conspiracy theory. So we're going to dangerous territory here.
What?
This immune system.
That there
thing,
is an immune
natural
system?
immunity.
Right.
I don't know.
You
The
mean that
official WHO position is
there's no such thing as an immune system?
no. You only get immunity from vaccines. Yeah.
Immunity is conferred via vaccines, not naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
You don't want to get in trouble with the WHO and YouTube. So
yeah.
I thought I should say that.
I mean, that said, that there is a lot of hard data showing that a lot of people, most of the population really, are actually in relatively little danger or no danger whatsoever from COVID, especially at this point, where it's mutated into some weird Omicron, Ninja, Lucifer variant or something. Where it's just basically it's like a flu or a cold basically, and basically if you knew that, if you looked at the data, and if you're a woman or a man and looked at the data showing the risk of a drop off in sperm counts at least, and the risk in blood clots, or the risk in menstrual problems, and you then looked at the risk to you of Omicron or the latest variant and saw that it was very small, you'd probably be it would be reasonable for you to say, well, listen, I'm not going to. The benefits outweigh the risk, basically, or the risk outweigh the benefits. So I don't need it. So that's another thing that you're not allowed to say, really, that people don't need. There are certain people who don't need the vaccine. And in fact, you could go further and say that, in fact, for those people, it is more risky to take the vaccine than to not take it at this point. Again, you don't hear anybody saying that. I mean, it's a revelation to me to actually hear myself say that.
Right.
And realize that I can say that, and it can be backed up with hard evidence, with peer-reviewed studies and hard data. And hopefully you won't get banned for it because of that, hopefully, or silenced or censored. There's also a new study. Did I censor you, Scotty? Maybe I didn't. A new study out of Canada, just within the last week, that talks to this point. It's from Manitoba, from the Manitoba Health. So it's what do you call that? State in Canada.
Province.
Province in Canada. And if you just scroll down to, there are bar charts, actual bar charts down, like not sideways bar charts, but after the pie charts, basically, right after the pie charts. Down further, right after the pie charts. Yeah, right there. Those guys. So this is age standardized rate and risk of severe outcomes associated with COVID-19 in Manitoba. And it's up until May 31st. That's the most recent month for which the figures are available. And the bottom line, I mean, we'll put this link up, you can look at it yourself, but the bottom line is that vaccinated people are now more likely to be hospitalized or die from COVID than unvaccinated people. And this is even after adjusting, as it shows there, after adjusting for the fact that the vaccinated people are older than the unvaccinated. We've got most of the people who, there's majority of older people who are vaccinated compared to younger people, so they adjusted for that. And it still shows that basically 9% of COVID deaths and 14% of hospital admissions, and this is in Manitoba, occurred among unvaccinated people, even though they are 17% of the population. Now, this is an important point, because people always, over the past few years, people have put up kind of different graphs like this showing that far more people who are vaccinated are in hospital with COVID or have died from COVID. And then the answer obviously is, well, that's because far more people in the population are, some 90% have been vaccinated. Mm-hmm. Of course, the graph is going to be, there's going to be a very small number of unvaccinated people who are in hospital or dying from with whatever COVID, because they're a tiny percentage of the population. But this data shows that in Manitoba, 17% of the population are unvaccinated, but they only make up 9% of COVID deaths. They should at least be 17% of COVID deaths, and in theory more, because when you're unvaccinated, you're more at risk, right?
Yeah.
So it's the first data I've actually seen that categorically shows that you are more likely to be hospitalized or die from COVID if you're vaccinated.
Wow. After all that.
But of course, this is just something that's published on Government Public Health Canada, Public Health Manitoba, and
So-
it's no media is going to pick up on this. Nobody's going to
Why would the media listen to what the government says?
exactly, yeah, especially when it's an inconvenient truth,
Crazy.
So, but there you go.
Presumably, this will spread. I mean, no one stopped them publishing it.
Well, but it's not. It is an inconvenient truth. There's no media, major mainstream media outlet in the world, at least in the Western world, that is going to run with that kind of data. Although that said, I think that's a bridge too far for them. They did mention that one we just put up about the. I think it's from NBC News. It's in the US, obviously, but it's from the bit about menstrual changes from COVID vaccines, maybe far more common. But again, it's one article. I don't see that across headline news, across all Western media. That was NBC News a few days ago. That was it. Should that not be something that should be kind of headline, at least for a day, or at least half a day, or a few hours across most of the, 'cause it's public information, right? It should be telling people who, the vast majority of people in Western populations, 70, 80, 90% of the population, obviously including women, received COVID vaccines, and it's definitely a public service announcement to let them know that 40% plus of people who got the vaccines have been having menstrual problems. I mean, they were forced to get the vaccine. Are you not responsible then to tell people when data comes to light that there are potential risks?
Change your advice.
Well, not even change your advice. Let them know that this is happening. Even just let them know that not thing that we forced you to do, that we all collectively hornswoggled you or manipulated you or threatened you into taking. Well, it now seems that there are potential problems with it. Just a heads up to all you people. You know what I mean? Because I'm just contrasting the blanket media and government
Dominant messaging.
propagandizing of the population to get the vaccine, and then the lack of letting them know about the possible dangers that have come to light after they have taken it.
But not
Do you
complete
agree?
lack. I mean, there's some. That was MSNBC.
Some,
we
but
saw
relative
report
lack
that.
compared
Yeah.
to
Overwhelmingly,
how-
it's still in one direction.
Yeah.
It's shocking.
it should be equal,
At least. But this is up, Scotty. This is from RT, but
Whatever.
it's been reported all over in Europe. Germany and France planning to require face masks indoor again this autumn as part of new COVID measures aimed at stemming the spread of COVID-19. The Justice Minister, not the Health Minister, the Justice Minister of Germany reports. It goes on, the summer wave of COVID-19 is already, quote, losing momentum, but we have to take very seriously what awaits us in the autumn and winter. I've already seen this effect in France. Things have happened before. Now, this isn't just a hypothetical for the season to come. France mandated, once again, the wearing of face masks in any and all public health settings, including pharmacies, for example, on street corners.
Right, that's a small tweak to...
It's a small tweak, but you can see, I noticed that more people were wearing them in stores around the time that was announced,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's weird how it affects the public consciousness. But yeah, that's, again, if you're to kind of like connect some dots or see some things that may or may not be there, let's say, but, draw tentative conclusions. I mean, continuing the COVID stuff, which it is continuing. It's ramping up in the middle of summer, and they're continuing to keep it, hot. Basically, keep it. No pun intended. To keep it hot, keep it on the front news, and keep it in the front of people's minds. And bringing back masks and bringing back these kind of controls. At the time when they imposed this a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, the lockdowns and all that kind of stuff, some people anyway saw it as kind of a step towards totalitarianism or to authoritarian rule of the people by government. They were very concerned about that. It felt like that to a lot of people. Of course, it was justified as for your good, for the health, for public health. But if you take that away, then you're left with the risk of government actually getting a taste for, as Bolsonaro, the president of
Brazil.
said a few weeks ago to Tucker Carlson, I think, he said that during the COVID lockdowns and stuff, certain governments or a lot of governments got a taste for what can be described as kind of dictatorial rule, and someone kind of liked it. They were like, "This is kind of nice. This is cool," you know. So, but that can be is that dictatorial rule just for the sake of it because I get off on it, or is it in this context and them talking about bringing back restrictions and controls this winter? That coincides with what we've just talked about earlier on the show, which is a winter of discontent as a result of gas price hikes or oil price hikes, and also lack of access to heat your home or to, you know, energy crisis, basically. That could lead to public social disruption, social, I don't want to say uprisings, but you could have public upset, basically, as a result of that. And of course, having these kind of controls and rules that you had imposed previously, and you can now reimpose them, and everybody knows the drill, right? Would be very useful. I mean, that's maybe seeing too much into it and seeing it as planned and in advance, but it would certainly be convenient, right? It certainly is convenient. I mean, if you look at it in the broader scale, if you expand that out to the past few years and see that they acclimatize people to these kind of restrictions and controls, that basically, like almost like Pavlovian dogs, they can say COVID, lockdown, and people will know what to do. You just mentioned seeing people without having to wearing masks simply because they were told that they're going to be used in
They're going to be
pharmacies.
used in these strict locations
So you
here,
start
but
wearing
it
them
didn't
everywhere.
matter. There was spillover.
Right.
Spontaneously just picked up. And
There's that reaction that they have, generated in people or provoked in people, and that could be useful. You could see how that could be useful, conditioning people in that way, in the scenario, conditioning that way in advance of a situation where you might expect, and you might be planning. Governments in the West may be planning now for potential social unrest this winter, for something completely different, something other than COVID, i.e. energy prices, energy supply problems, freezing in your home, no food in the supermarkets, or
the cynic in
useful.
me says, yes, people are sheep.
Yeah.
They will obey, but I don't know. When they're hungry, will they obey face mask rules?
Will they respond to COVID?
We'll see.
Possibly not, but it's a useful tactic anyway, I'd say, So
The thing in Holland's ongoing. Is that an uprising?
Oh.
Yeah, it's still officially a farmers' protest, but they have popular support.
Yeah, before we get off Germany's all quiet on the Western Front. We have to watch this. It's just for what it's worth. This is Trump back in 2018. It's 28 seconds, and it's a big I told you.
Germany will become totally dependent on Russian energy if it does not immediately change course. Here in the Western Hemisphere, we are committed to maintaining our independence from the encroachment of expansionist foreign powers. It has been the formal policy of our country since President Monroe.
You see the reaction of the German UN reps, or the ambassador, or people, whatever. They're just kind of like, what is this idiot talking about? And yet that's exactly what Germany itself is saying, has been saying over the past 5 or 6 months, That's only 2018, okay, so it's 3.5 years ago. But still, 3.5 years after Trump says that, it's absolutely true, and the Germans are saying it themselves, while at the time they laughed at him and kind of rolled their eyes at him. Bizarre.
Yeah, well, it's like some of the other things. It just goes to show it wasn't because of what Trump was trying to do, but because it was Trump saying it.
Right.
That.
But that's ridiculous, like.
There are so many foreign policy things that.
Because of who says it.
They've continued.
Yeah.
Under Biden. But because he was the one who was seeking to have his influence stamped on it, no, he can't do it. It's really weird, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Venezuela is another one. I mean, no one would disagree that in the U.S. establishment anyway, that attempting to unseat Maduro was the right thing to do, but because it was Trump, it's
Right.
particularly tarnished, or it's allowed to be recognized that it was a bad thing,
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
What's protests in Italy, protests, but those are interesting. There's protests ongoing in Amsterdam.
Flare-ups of social unrest, let's say.
Yeah. Italy, it's not so much, it's to do with fertilizer as well. It's to do with the transition to sustainable, reducing nitrogen, because carbon, because global warming, because look outside, it's super hot. They're, having to go at farmers basically. And in Italy, I think there's been protests as well, adding to what you were saying about Amsterdam. It spread to Italy. But yeah, it's we talked about that previously, but I don't know. There's so many things that these people are doing that really don't make any sense whatsoever. And we've talked about this. I think we talked about this last week about what the only thing you can conclude when you see the policies of governments, particularly in the West these days, is that it's a reasonable conclusion. I'm not saying it's the correct conclusion, but it's a reasonable conclusion. You can't fault anybody for concluding that these people are trying to fuck things up in a big way just because. They're following reckless, feckless policies that don't make any sense, that don't have any positive outcome, but that will have seriously negative impacts on the economy and on the lives of many people for some ulterior motive. Because I don't believe that they believe seriously in climate change and man-made global warming, and I don't believe that they, or at the very least, I don't believe that they think that any of the policies that they would pursue in terms of reducing CO2, etc., would actually have any significant impact on it, but they're pushing forward with that anyway.
Yeah, or that renewables can replace.
Or that renewables can replace, that you can replace
fossil fuels. You've talked in the past about the unbelievable evidence for that fact last year when the wind farms in the UK didn't blow strong enough to make up the percentage needed for wind power to supply the British electrical grid. Look at this one from Texas. This is I think it's this month. Bloomberg. Headline: Texas wind power is failing right now when the state needs it most. It's not working,
Generating 8% of installed available capacity.
I don't know what percentage now they're supposed to make up, but
Ideally 100%.
Well, yes, but I think even they acknowledge that, there's a mix of renewables for now.
But
ideally,
I don't know. I read that to mean that turbines are generating 8% of their potential capacity of what they should be installed for the turbines.
Right.
What is the reason that it's failing?
There's not enough wind.
Okay, it's too hot and it's not enough wind.
There just hasn't been, the normal wind patterns weren't quite the same this year.
Exactly. But how stupid do you have to be to not foresee that?
Right.
Or not see that as a problem?
And we don't allow that they're that stupid.
Right.
They can be
incredibly. Which is why we conclude
that
they have there's a different motivation, a different agenda, and it's not. If you follow through, it's not a very nice agenda, I don't know. It's just like we've been dancing. How long do we have to dance around this? But years gone by, we used to be kind of a bit more forthright about this. About they're all out to get us. They're evil psycho elites who are out to kind of like screw over the population and stuff. More recently, as we get older and stuff, we become a bit more circumspect. Not least maybe because of the potential of being banned, censored for saying things like that. But it's almost like we just have to go through the process of dancing around this and suggesting that maybe it looks like this might be, when it's, it's increasingly obvious that has to be part of the agenda, but we still talk about it in a circumspect way. But as time progresses, I get the impression that it will become self-evident, but at that point it's too late.
Mm-hmm. A bit like 2 years ago, what you just explained now about COVID. it's too late. 90%. Not that we ever had any hopes of stopping the 90% from making the decisions they made in those 2 years, but yeah, that's pretty much all you can do. You can comment after the fact. In the moment, you're like, well, I suppose it could theoretically be this. What do you people think? In a sense, though, it's good. It has been useful for us as well to, challenge our own assumptions, because they can get stale. Sometimes we do get it wrong. We've had to update. But on broad strokes, we've been right about the direction things are going in, and the likely ulterior motives that unite everything from the green agenda to COVID to geopolitics and war with Russia. Just before we leave, this is a detail that connects people in the US will be familiar with this phenomenon. From Dutch news last week, I'll have to explain what's going on, but the headline is Picnic Distribution Center burns to the ground. Fire brigade investigates. So Picnic is actually kind of misspelled. Their brand name is capital N, so Picnic, whatever. Picnic is an online food retailer in the Netherlands. So when they say the distribution center burns to the ground, I think it's the only one. It's quite large. People shop online, and it's a small country, so it can, wherever you are in the country in the Netherlands, your food can arrive to you.
Right.
Now, this got some traction online because people went, they showed images of this fire. Indeed, it burned to the ground, but they got it wrong, and they suggested that it was a Bill Gates owned or funded fake meat lab that burned to the ground. And that's not what it is. Bill Gates has his fingers in such pies, but bloody Associated Press did a fact check on it, as on the story as such, and they went false, patently false. But what they left out is that this regular retail food distribution company is in fact part funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They have an investment in it. It's not a majority ownership, but there is a Gates link. Again, I can't say any more than that, but it's weird. That's all. I would just add it on to, especially for Americans, they've noticed food distribution centers going up in flames in the last year. We counted 100 fires or weird accidents in the last year and a half. That's another one across the water in the Netherlands.
There's just talking about what you were saying about earlier on about the us, not being able to convince people like that. We say it anyway, but we can't. It's too late by the time it becomes clear that what we were saying is actually the case, and what we and a lot of other people were saying is true. That we had no hope of ever changing people's opinion, but we say it anyway because it's the truth. But there's a guy called, you probably watched him a bit. He's a Dutch guy actually, Matthias Desmet. He's the guy who talked about the mass formation psychosis, who was popular.
He's Belgian, actually.
Yeah. Close enough.
Close enough. He's Flemish.
There you go.
A Dutchy Belgian.
Half. Mass formation psychosis, which was basically almost like just the madness of crowds, basically, where there's a meme gets
the Bonds theory updated.
Yeah. But Ivor Cummins, who's an Irish guy, he's a kind of nutritionist basically, and he's been very much anti-vaccine for the past few years. He did an interview with him, but Matthias Desmond has done an interview with other people in talking about this mass formation psychosis, and he actually says explicitly, and we'll put a link to the place where he says it, I think, or the video where he's talking to Ivor Cummins, and he says that it's very useful for the people who aren't part of the mass formation psychosis, who are kind of like can defend themselves against it and not take part in it. It's very important that they actually speak out, because even though their voice is small, it stops the crowd mentality from going too far. Because if you look at history, it can go too far, where people just kind of lose their minds completely, and you have a really bad situation. But that the evidence suggests that any resistance, however small, to that mass psychosis, effectively, or mass delusion, has the effect of at least limiting the damage that it does. That most people will still get caught up in it and engage in nonsensical, crazy, ridiculous things or beliefs, but that the existence of a counter narrative to it, however small, is very important to restrain the worst excesses of that kind of mass groupthink of about something that is just simply wrong or simply a bad idea.
Commons, contrary to more materialist economic explanations of history, common sense is what keeps civilizations going. I agree with Desmond, and I would in no way discourage him or anyone else in that direction, because it's the only thing, probably the only reason things have not gone FUBAR yet. The problem is, you look at history, and there seems to be a threshold or a point at which the common sense is eroded to a sufficient degree. We don't know where that is, and then it collapses.
Yeah. But it's interesting
Because civilizations have ended.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it goes too far. Yeah, and no longer the voice in the wilderness type thing is no longer enough to make any difference. Yeah, but I mean, even in a practical sense, how it actually manifests is what you just mentioned there about some fact checking organization or some news outlet fact checking these allegations. That at least makes them pause, or gives them, when they have to go around fact checking a lot of things, that are officially counter narratives, it takes up their time in a certain sense, and it maybe makes them stop and think that, you know, they can't railroad everybody, that they have to kind of like take into consideration. Anytime a politician or the media addresses a counter narrative to the official version of events, it suggests that they're taking it, that it's significant enough, that it's gaining enough traction, because if it wasn't, why would they bother? The very fact that they actually have to speak out against this, like after 9/11, George Bush, you know, let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories. Why would he bother saying that if he didn't realize, or if his people in the
whoever gave him the speech,
or the people who are keeping an eye on what people are thinking in society, let's say, or the dominant discourse, how it's going, if they didn't think that there was a significant enough number of people who don't believe what we're saying, and that's something that we have to spend time on and try to, and even adjust our own narrative, water down our own narrative a little bit, not come on too strong. We have to actually sprinkle our lie with a little more truth, because it seems that we're going too far with the lie, and we're getting a backlash, at least from a section of the population who have a let's say a taste for things that are true, or a bullshit detector. We're having too much of a backlash from those people, so we're coming on too strong with our propaganda. So we need to add more truth into it to appease those people, and that has the effect of reducing the impact that a big lie can have on a population. So it's the point is that it's still useful, even though it's disheartening, and you see people just marching headlong towards into ridiculous beliefs and following illogical, unreasonable, implausible narratives, and putting their bodies on the line in a certain sense. When you see that happening, it's disheartening to realize that even you and others who are trying to point it out don't seem to be having an effect. It does have an effect in that way that I just described, of limiting the damage it can do to society. So,
sort of related then, did you see that Tony Blair had a conversion experience?
Did he?
On
Jesus
the road to
Christ.
Damascus. He gave a speech titled
I saw that.
After Ukraine, What Lessons Now for Western Leadership? A small quote from it. We are coming to the end of Western political and economic dominance. The world is going to be at least bipolar and possibly multipolar.
He would know what bipolar is all about.
Of course, it's still framed in an us versus them. The biggest geopolitical challenge of the century will come from China, not Russia. But he's just the use of the term multipolar. I don't think I recall such a senior past or present leader even use the term. It's a kind of forced, one impression I had from it was a forced acknowledgement of some of the greater reality outside of the accepted dominant framework in the West. the reason, I suppose, well, I'll link it to what was just said, because in the end, reality and the greater common sense, or whatever it's called, always has some mitigating effect, even if it only forces crazed ideological narrative writers to adapt their script. But in the course of adapting the script, they are going to soften the previously hardcore direction they were going to take. It is going to be mitigated.
Right.
And I'm willing to suspect, like, part of the reason I would refrain from having such a certain position on what they're up to and where they're going with this is because it might actually change. It might actually mitigate, at least partly. The West, as such, is a big geographical place. There are lots of differences and varieties within it. So I can't actually sit here and say there's one agenda and it's all, being railroaded in one direction, and this is what's going to happen. Because it's not that simple. It's a dynamic world, and that's only 1 billion people. There's the other 7 billion have agency too,
Right.
The skeptics within the billion of the West have agency too, even if they're silenced and censored.
Yeah. What about talking about it's all quiet in the Western Front? What about Ukraine and Russia? It's all quiet on that front, isn't it?
Today is the anniversary of MH17. By the way, not sure what the official status with that investigation is, but
Official status is Putin killed my baby.
right, it still is. Did you see Jordan Peterson's monologue?
Did, yeah.
Interesting, no?
Yeah. Well, he gets it, like.
He
I mean,
gets
he's
it.
still trying to be balanced and all that kind of stuff. He doesn't get it fully, but there's not many people get it fully, you know what I mean, in that sense, you know what I mean? But he's come a long way in a short period of time. He was basically, he didn't know anything about any of this. He's had his eyes opened. And that's the interesting thing, is the events, to look at the people who have had their eyes opened over the past few years. He had his eyes opened with COVID, and he's having his eyes opened, or has had his eyes opened over the Ukraine situation. He's thinking about it, and he's calling it more or less for what it is, while still trying to remain balanced, because you can't expect them to be full on woke in that respect. But it's interesting to see the people who have a clue when they look at world events and they weigh it up and they call it for what it is. Those are people who have the eyes to see, who always had the eyes to see, who have the ability to see, whereas there's some people who just will never get it. They do the opposite. They have done the opposite. They swallowed the narrative over the past few years about COVID or about Ukraine. They swallowed the Western government, Washington establishment, Whitehall, UK Whitehall establishment narrative, hook, line and sinker. They willingly swallow it and ask for more, whereas other people go, hang on a minute. They have a reaction to bullshit, basically. It's like a bullshit detector, basically.
Yeah.
If you've got a functioning bullshit detector,
He basically said, look, we don't really care about Ukraine except as a battering ram against Russia.
Right.
So,
and he also, his main point, and this is where, he does have a history that helps him to understand this, which is that his history of looking into the excesses of communism in Russia and other places, but particularly in Russia, and his affinity for Dostoevsky and basically the exposure of what communism was and what it did and what that ideology
especially
is.
its excesses,
Right, and how it's being, then you see how it's being exported, or how it's taking hold. Let's say a similar ideology is taking hold in the radical lefty camp in Western countries, particularly in Canada and in the US. And that's tied to his understanding of Russia and Soviet Russia. And so basically what he was saying in that kind of monologue was that he understood, he didn't say it explicitly in these terms, but what he was saying effectively was that Russia has gone through that experience. The Russian people and the Russian government and Putin, whatever, went through that experience of communism. They know where it leads. They see the West going in that direction, and they say, we're not going back there. We're not doing that. And part of Ukraine is part of that kind of that ideology, effectively. It's tied up within that ideology. When you see the Ukraine flag on the Pride flag, you know what I mean? It's somehow stitched in together, and the Russians see that and they say, you know, and more broadly, they look at the degradation of Western society into this radical, ridiculous wokeism, and they, even though it's very different, let's say, from what people imagine or experience communism as, there was no, you know, radical liberal trans activism or those kind of rights under communism, let's say, explicitly, but he sees it as the same.
There were at the beginning. It's interesting.
Well, but not,
it evolved.
Yeah, but not to the extent that you're seeing
I'll
it.
talk about, sorry, you continue.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, it's not to the extent that you see it. It's not, it didn't hold a central, central
It
place
wasn't.
in communist
it didn't
ideology.
last. It was discarded quickly.
Right.
At the beginning, though, sexual liberation, women's lib movement was core to the whole Bolshevik thing. They dropped it when Stalin came in. Stalin came in, and it's like they went. He rejected two things. He rejected communism in all countries. The mission of Moscow was no longer to lift up everyone and to start color revolutions all over the place. He dropped that. It became socialism in one country, i.e., National Socialism. Sorry to conflict the terms, but just here. And the second thing was he went just socialism on the economic sphere. The social sphere, leave it the hell alone. Back to families, more or less traditional values. So he became a social conservative with still the more extreme Marxist interpretation of a controlled planned economy. Anyway, but yes, but he also made reference to that Putin has said. So he has been listening to things Putin has said.
Well,
that's just such a basic starting point.
Yeah,
for
we have
anyone
to,
in the West has to actually listen.
Right.
And
And take it seriously.
he's noted, Peterson noted that Putin has explicitly talked about the values and the self-destructive effects it's having in the West.
Right.
And yes, we don't want it to happen here.
Yeah.
I loved it because it was the first time I've seen someone articulate a connection between the so-called culture wars, intra-West culture wars, and the Russia-Ukraine situation. I wonder if he realizes the extent of it. Well, maybe he does, and he was just putting it out there, and he would only say so much because his friend and somewhat collaborator, at least for a while there in podcasts and whatnot, the guy whose book we cite a lot, Jonathan Haidt. Jonathan Haidt was on the Rogan podcast a couple of years ago, and Rogan was asking, where did this come from and when? The extreme subjectivity of My Truth, Your Truth, and SJWs and stuff. And Haidt said, I've looked at it. It's 2014. Haidt made no reference to Ukraine and geopolitics. He said it took off in 2014. I'm not sure how or why, but he gave a lot of salient examples and some data to back that up. And he's like, 2014 was the year. And I went, that indeed, 2014 was the year internationally. And then I was trying to think, well, how do you reconcile the two? Well, Peterson did it for me. He said, what if? Remember in his monologue, he said it more than once. He considers culturally Russia to be part of the West in large part. That's why he brings in Dostoevsky and the experience of all these writers before the communism and during Solzhenitsyn and stuff. He sees it that way. So he's like, he suggests, what if the Ukraine war was Russia putting its bare paw down and saying, you're not going to shake up ideologically here and therefore there and therefore here, greater Russia. So Peterson reframed it and said, what if this is not a so-called civil war within the Russian world, in quotes, but this is a civil war within the West? This is the first actual material expression of where it could go for all of us. We start fighting each other over this goddamn cultural war. So it's a very interesting, because the dominant narrative has been stringently, especially since 2014, trying to excise in people's mind that Russia is outside. And of course, that has roots back in the Cold War, Iron Curtain. They're not part of us at all. Russia. Peterson's like, they are. They are. That is the West, especially when you look at
well, you would have to, from
the
there,
geographic location of where most Russians live.
Right.
The cities are European, etc.
Well, you'd have to follow that through. You'd have to kind of maybe start considering, or you'd have to consider Russia's ostensible reason, much talked about reason for its special military operation in Ukraine, which is to denazify. So it's a culture war. and it's basically Europe like pushing back against the cultural Marxism, as it's called, that has taken over many Western countries, and that Ukraine is part of that, and Russia is fighting against that, and they say they're fighting against Nazism.
Mm-hmm.
Then do you make a connection between cultural Marxism and Nazism?
Definitely. Definitely. Both extremes. It gets confusing when people jump from one to the other, but for me, I can reconcile the two. On the one hand, you can say what's happening in the West now is communist in nature. On the other, it's pretty goddamn fascist too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
In the Nazi sense. And there's continuity. There's historical continuity. Like Ukraine's leadership today. Not Zelensky, of course, but in many positions that we've seen, have their grandfathers wore the SS uniforms,
Right.
and in the interim, they were not actually in Ukraine. They were part of a diaspora, often in Canada, the US, the UK, and there's been constant back and forth. And this is there's direct link, you know.
Well, the tentative will to the tentative connection between the two is that they're both basically a will to personal power over others, right? That's what obviously Nazism was, and
an ugly extreme form of
and
dominance.
Yeah, and in the West, that's what people are reacting against. People who are against the radical lefty cultural Marxist ideology is that they're seeing it that primarily at its base, they're seeing it as these people want to take over and dictate to us what we can and can't do. They want to control the minutiae of our lives and force us to do things that we don't want to do. I mean, in essence, it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah,
It takes
in
on a
essence.
different. It takes on. If you look at it only from the surface level, you say, well, they're two opposites,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Look at
What are you
gay,
saying?
Gay pride and Nazis.
And anyway, Zelensky's Jewish.
Don't gay people punch Nazis? Aren't the radical lefty? They're all out to punch Nazis, as they said. But when you talk about Zelensky, Zelensky's not a serious person. Neither is Arestovich or Arestovich. The other guy.
Arestovich, yeah.
Those guys who are the kind of like the spokespeople, at least for the West, the public spokespeople for Ukraine and what Ukraine wants to be and what Ukraine is fighting against and what Ukraine is fighting for. The two of them have histories of dressing up as women and prancing around on a stage. I mean, they're not serious people. They're not serious politicians. They're not people that anybody in their right mind would want to be in a position of leadership over them. There's jokes. Zelensky's a comedian at the very least. You know what I mean? But no, I mean,
I think back to the description by Sebastian Hafner in Defying Hitler. So it's a kind of a memoir, and that it was written at the time. He wasn't writing after the fact when the narrative was setting about Hitler bad, fascism bad. He was a guy in Germany who had alarm bells going off in his head, and he was describing the practical psychological effect he felt in himself and observed in others around him. And the thing he said, he had arguments about politics and whether it was right or wrong with his friends, but that was all surface. He had no interest in that. He realized the arguments went round and round, got nowhere, and just left with people being angry and friendships splitting, families separating, you know. What was happening, he said, was that the state was trying to get into your head. The state was to become the personal. It was to be in your mind when you woke up and when you went to sleep, when you dreamed. The state was to be in your head. Now, okay, that's over there, right? That's fascism. That's the hard right. That's the expression of totalitarianism from the conservative ultra-right. Now, go back to the books of the some of the seeds that gave rise to the extreme left ideology we see rampant in the West today. What were they saying? There's one that's like, I can't remember her name, but she's like a famous women's movement feminist leader. She said,
Germaine Greer, no?
I don't think it's Greer, but
Go ahead.
they were saying the personal is the political. It was a hardcore message in the heart of the civil rights and anti-war movements in the left from the 1960s to today. The personal is the political. They wanted to get into everything. You know, families, your head,
Yeah.
morning, noon, and night.
It's a will to power. Well, look at COVID. what was going through people over the whole first couple of years or the whole lockdown period. I mean, the state was in people's heads all the time. It was government scientists. What's Fauci saying? What are government scientists saying? What's Chris Whitty saying? What's the Department of Health saying? Every morning, wake up. You know,
Every
dream about
Thursday,
them.
every Thursday, 11 a.m. in Britain.
Every Thursday, 8 a.m.
At
or 8
a
p.m.
specific time,
6
we will
p.m.
all
or 8
stand
p.m.
out
in
and
the
clap
evenings.
for the NHS.
Like a bunch of like a bunch of seals. Yeah, I don't like saying that because I know people who did that. But anyway,
Meantime, they're still churning out the copium on Ukraine.
yeah. Did you hear they were going to mobilize 1 million people? But then they said that was a mistake. No shit, it was a mistake.
I have the headline. Do you want to
Go ahead.
put it up? Yeah, the headline is like, it's pure copium. But then you read the details, and it's actually just Zelensky boasting that 1 million Ukrainians will rise up and take arms. But the British media presented this as Ukraine's counterattack is going to recruit 1 million soldiers.
Yeah.
That's the headline of the Sunday Times last week. Ukraine has 1 million ready for fight back to recapture South. And a picture of 3 soldiers holding their British supplied weapons. You look at that and you go, damn, wow, Ukraine is a million soldiers. Russia's going to be crushed.
Ukraine is massing 1 million strong fighting force equipped with Western weapons to recover its southern territory from Russia, the nation's defense minister said. And then
The details below are actually that the source is Zelensky boasting on Ukrainian TV that we can rally 1 million civilians and give them weapons.
if we wanted to, if we could. Well,
Because
in
that's how
theory,
much I'm loved here in
in
Kiev.
theory, yeah, we could do this if we wanted, yeah. And of course,
Copium,
that's
pure
but that's
copium.
the Sunday Times. You know, paper. If there's any paper in the UK that's a paper of record, it's the Sunday Times, and they're peddling that kind of copium bullshit.
Another one, maybe this one requires a little more analysis. This is the Telegraph this week. It's definitely copium, but still, because there were a couple of things that happened that maybe we have to parse. The headline in the Telegraph a week ago: Russia suffers, quote, wild shell hunger as Ukraine hits arms depots with long-range Western rockets. Putin's forces face out of the blue ammunition shortages as warehouses destroyed one by one using HIMAR and MLRS weapons. Well, that was the big hoo-ha. HIMARs are American-made, long-range
Artillery.
multi-launch rocket system.
Yeah.
Supplied recently to Ukraine, 4 of them? 4 systems? The Russians have already
HIMARS are artillery.
bought one on the black market.
Yeah.
It's been sold.
No, but that's just more bullshit. I mean, at this point, I've seen someone like for what is it now, 4 or 5 months. For 5 months, I've been watching Western media headlines about the war in Ukraine, and every single one of them, when that talk about the analysis of how it's going, have been wrong. Every single one. And like we've talked about this before, that either is, I don't believe it's complete ignorance. It's just like it's confirmation bias or what we want to believe, or they're doing it consciously
I
as
think
a
it's
way
conscious.
to try and prop up support for Ukraine and to big up the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military to tell them that they're winning. Because what kind of support are you going to get for a war if you're repeatedly told that you're losing? You're losing, and you're going to lose eventually. Well, then people will be like, well, why are we continuing? So you got to tell them, we're winning, and you will win eventually. So keep going to the last Ukrainian. That's the whole point of the Western media. That's the role the Western media has played for the past 5 months. And like literally, I'm not joking. It may sound like an exaggeration, but literally every single Western media headline about what was happening in Ukraine has been proven very quickly. It could be proven there and then, or very quickly afterwards to be false. And not just a bit false, fully 100% false.
Can you put it back briefly, Scotty? I actually I'm an acquaintance of the lead author, Roland Oliphant. I knew him in university.
Elephant. Oliphant.
He was a friend of a friend. Yeah, never could have imagined. I couldn't believe when he popped up in this position. Anyway, 8 years ago, he was writing for the Telegraph from the border. He was, I guess, on the Ukrainian side of the Russian border, churning out stories about how the Russians, 10,000 Russian troops have invaded. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
They've invaded. Oh no, not supplied weapons. They've invaded. And then when the fighting got really bad in mid 2014, around this time actually, the Russians sent in large convoys of humanitarian aid, and he was on hand with his buddy Sean, what's his name, over the Guardian, to send home reports that Russia was using the guise of humanitarian aid to ship in weapons. Just one after the other. So I challenged him on Twitter. He said, you know, you got any evidence for this? Blah blah blah, and he just blocked me. So up yours, Roland. Now, since then, it's emerged that he was indeed churning out pure bullshit.
Yep.
There was no evidence whatsoever, because that NATO guy, who was actually part of a team to investigate the extent, if at all, of Russian arms smuggling into Donetsk and Donbass 8 years ago, at the beginning of this, found nothing.
Yeah.
Now, we still couldn't believe that. We thought surely they got some military support,
Yeah.
but it seems to be mostly like volunteers, genuine volunteers from Russia, and strategic support possibly. But there's no evidence of weapons, much less an invasion 8
Yeah.
years ago. So
Well, this-
when they're churning out such BS all the time,
There's something like 30. I saw some statistics. Take them for what they're worth. 30. I think 30,000. Was it 30,000? I think it's 30,000 tons of military equipment, including shells. So thousands of tons of weapons, ordnance, is being shipped into Ukraine every day to supply the Russian military. So to destroy all of those with a few HIMARS is ridiculous. You know what I mean? I mean, again,
well,
there's no point in
the
even.
reason I suggested at the outset there might be something, because there were videos of massive explosions on the behind the Russian line in Donetsk from this week.
Yeah, but who knows what they're hitting? And again, it's a few.
A few.
People don't understand the magnitude of the Russian military operation in Ukraine and how much equipment is being supplied every day to them. You know what I mean? There are train loads repeatedly every day. You know what I mean? On that point, actually, just throw that one up, Scotty. So forget about what Ukrainian government says. Forget about what Zelensky says. Forget about what Ukrainian channels on Twitter say. Forget about what the Western media says. The only thing you need to really be that's only of real interest to see where this situation in Ukraine is going to go, other than where it's almost certainly going to go anyway, which is that Russia is going to achieve its objectives, is what America is planning to do to try and blow the whole thing up. And to create a much more serious situation. This is one example. Ukraine threatens to strike Crimea. Now, of course, that means America threatens to strike Crimea with American missiles, right? So he says this is, the talking head, Ministry of Defense. He's speaking out of the State Department. May as well be. Says that today the Crimean Peninsula has become a hub for the movement of all equipment and weapons that come from the Russian Federation to the south of our state. It is first of all a cluster of military hardware, ammunition, and materials that are concentrated in the Crimea and then sent in to supply the Russian occupying forces. So this is a threat that, again, if you read between the lines, it's not a threat coming from Ukraine, because Ukraine doesn't really have the capability or the authorization to do anything like this, because this is an American war, American proxy war, effectively, against Russia, using the Ukrainian military that they have been training, as we've been saying repeatedly, for the past 8 years, for the express purpose of launching a war against the people of Donbass and to try and take back Crimea, and possibly then to have some kind of interaction with across the border into Russia. That was very clear. They were planning to do it early this year, and that's why Russia invaded, in order to protect itself from that very clear and present threat that had been building for 8 years. I'm sick of people who don't understand that and how, Anyway, so there's that, and then there's the potential
Just
for
spillover
some...
of weapons onto the black market from Ukraine outwards.
Right.
Like there were videos this week I saw in Slovakia or somewhere. People are, with Slovakian plates, they're rolling up and they're making deals or offers, in the woods somewhere, and it's full of
Weapons,
American, British weapons.
Yeah. And then there's this one, which is, it's been in the news as well. Just recently, United States, basically Congress approved $100 million for training Ukrainian pilots to fly American fighter jets, which obviously, why would you do that if you didn't have a plan to actually supply them with American fighter jets, i.e. F-16s, F-15s? If that happens, that's They talked about this before. You probably remember a few months ago, talked about possibly supplying
Polish jets,
Polish F-15s, F-16s to Ukrainians, and then they said no, it's a bad idea because that would basically, if you have F-15s and F-16s that Ukraine never had being shot down. I mean, who knows? At the end of the day, yeah, they're training the Ukrainian pilots. How do you know it's not an American pilot? Okay, maybe American pilots don't want to die in Ukraine, but who knows? I mean, at that point, it's actually American fighter pilots flying American planes and bombing Russian troops in Ukraine. That's a war
under
between
Pentagon command.
Right, that's a direct war. So they're trying to play with this, the exact definition of no, we're not directly involved in war with Russia.
And
Well, how far do you push that until it's very clear that
I
you
think
are?
they push it too far.
That's what may happen, So this is they're apparently being trained. They don't know exactly where, but the reports anyway out of the US are that is what is happening. Adam Zinger, if you just scroll down in that article, Scotty, Adam Zinger, who is he's a rep congressman from Illinois, and he's a former Air Force pilot himself, says in that tweet, their pilots are second to none. American pilots are second to none, and I am proud that last night the House passed my bipartisan Ukrainian Fighter Pilots Act, which authorizes the training of Ukrainian fighter pilots in the US. I urge the Senate to get this critical legislation to the president's desk. Slava Ukraini, what an idiot! Like, talk about being ideologically possessed. What does that guy care about Ukraine? Really, what does he care? I mean, where does he get his? He obviously is a massively ignorant person, But anyway, that's the kind of people that are in positions of power get to make laws basically and to expropriate American tax dollars and send them down the Swanee.
Here's another one published last week in The Guardian. Ukrainian soldiers arrive in UK for training with British forces. Subheadline, up to 10,000 new recruits will train for several weeks.
To go,
Again, it
to go
pushes the line of, well, it's not us, it's their war. We're just helping them.
couple more on Ukraine, and then we're done, I think. This one, I don't know if you saw this one. It's the Emperor himself, Palpatine himself, dropping a few pearls of wisdom. Let's have a listen.
Of our best foundations, they refuse to leave, and they are leading civil society. I also want to mention that there is one person who was very deeply involved in Ukraine, and that's Biden. In fact, I got to know him with regard to Ukraine. He had a lot more patience than I had in trying to convert Poroshenko into a democratic leader. I fed up with him and I told him so, but actually Biden kept on trying to convert Poroshenko into a Democrat.
Thank you, George.
Good man, George.
Thank
so,
you, George.
So Biden was doing his best
You
to
kooky weirdo.
to convert Poroshenko, who was the golden boy, right? He was the great leader of Ukrainian democracy after the US-backed coup in 2014, and he's the one for a few years anyway, under whose stewardship, or supposed stewardship,
One term, yeah.
allowed the US to continue to train Ukrainian military to wage a war against Russia, basically. And on that topic, then we also have. Well, actually, before you play that one, Scotty, let's just do a little thing. Stick that one up. Here's Poroshenko. Speaking of Poroshenko, of course, Poroshenko was almost going to be thrown in prison by Zelensky recently for corruption. You saw it earlier this year. He was like he did leave the country and then came back. Anyway, just throw up that this is Poroshenko. I don't know how long ago, a few years ago.
Before the war.
Сьогодні у нас виготовлено 2 бандермобіля для
Two Bandera
206-го
mobiles.
батальйону, ви бачите славних бійців наших. Батько наш Бандера, Україна мати, ми за Україну будемо воювати. Наш Бандера, Україна мати, ми за Україну будемо воювати. Причому йдемо воювати на Бандермобілі.
On the Bandera mobile. They should send in some Bandera. They should just mass-produce Bandera mobiles, which are Toyota Hilux pickups with some machine guns in the back, and send them against the Russians, and put Poroshenko and Zelensky and the rest of them on them.
Remember,
but
there
those-
are no Nazis in Ukraine.
Yeah, Bandera. I hope everybody who's listening to this knows who Bandera is. But there's Poroshenko, the great democratic leader. Although not by George Soros's estimation, apparently he let that one slip, that Poroshenko was not, in fact, a democratic leader. And he just gave up trying to convert him into, from a corrupt tyrant, effectively, into a democratic leader. Just couldn't make any headway. And Biden had more patience, but Biden had more invested, right? Biden had, you've just put up that previous tweet I sent to Scotty, Biden had more investment in converting and Poroshenko and staying the course in Ukraine, because here's, this is just before Trump's inauguration in 2016, Biden talking to Poroshenko.
Overdrive to clean up loose ends. November 16, 2016, 2 weeks after Donald Trump's victory, Joe Biden is on the phone with Poroshenko. His voice tenser now than before.
This is getting very, very close. What I don't want to have happen, I don't want Trump to get in the position where he thinks he's about to buy onto a policy where the financial system is going to collapse and he's going to be looked to pour more money into Ukraine. That's how he'll think about it before he gets sophisticated enough to know the details.
In other words, Biden does not want Ukraine asking for more money from Trump. Doing so would cause Trump to look into the details.
So anything you can do to push the Privat Bank to closure so that the IMF loan comes forward, I would respectfully suggest is critically important to your economic as well as physical security.
Critically,
Physical security. That's how you talk to a Democratic leader. You threaten their physical security.
Was he just in that moment breaking the Logan Act?
Yeah.
He's talking to a foreign leader behind the lead, outside the formal channels of government.
Well, technically, he was still
Vice
wasn't-
president.
Trump wasn't.
He was
he was
only
vice.
elect.
He was still vice president. He wasn't inaugurated yet. No,
Right.
he was getting the last ditch. He was getting the last speech in. But he was, of course, what he was effectively doing there was protecting his own
Investments.
details of his own corruption and that of his son Hunter in Ukraine.
The
It's a
details he was worried about.
Privat Bank, Kolomoisky, basically.
Burisma,
Yeah, Burisma.
10% for the big guy.
billions of dollars taken from Privat Bank, from basically from the bank itself, defrauding the bank and embezzling money from the bank. I think $5 billion, and investing it in the US with business partners unknown. So yeah, I was very concerned about that was a fallout of Trump being elected, of the shock of Trump being elected, of Hillary not winning, and Biden suddenly going, holy shit, there's some details in Ukraine here that I need to cover, need to clean up, basically. And then, of course, Trump followed through on that and was part of the whole impeachment process, right? He tried to include that as part of the impeachment process, his attempts to influence, to do exactly what Biden didn't want him to do there, which is attempt to influence the Ukrainian government
to
investigate Biden.
Right.
Talk about corruption. People are living under this level of scum and corruption.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they think and they wonder why things are going to hell in a handbasket. Look up.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all I have to say about the war in Vietnam. I mean, the war in Ukraine. Apart from, here's one last little picture. And this goes out to all the Germans. Well, actually, it goes out to all the people of Europe and America. And it's from The Economist. The Economist just is really good at propaganda. in picture form on their covers. Aren't they?
Super, the best.
This is what's going to happen. This is what you're meant to understand is going to happen to you this winter. Whatever happened to you this winter, this is the image you have to keep in mind. That's Europe. Poor little girl
Little Red Riding Hood.
walking through the forest innocently, and the evil black Russian bear with red eyes stalking you. That's what we need to remember, people.
And she's not walking through a forest, but it's a forest, but it's also like gas pipelines. Exactly. You see that?
Yes.
Little detail. Oh, very artistic.
Oh, very funny.
The Economist. You know, it's been going 200 years.
Yeah.
That shit rag. And people take it seriously. And they think they're serious when they take it seriously. Look at me, I have a copy of The Economist on my coffee table.
I'm so smart. I get the high quality propaganda, highbrow propaganda, not that lowbrow stuff. Yeah, so I think we'll leave it there. We hope you enjoyed our little discussion of ongoing events, the microcosm, the macrocosm. We did our best, but again, it's on a week by week basis, so you know things can change, and we'll keep you abreast of you know what's going on as far as we see it, and yeah. And to that effect, we'll be back next week with another show. We hope you enjoyed this one. We thank you for watching, listening, commenting, all that kind of stuff. And don't forget to smash all the buttons because we want you to. And we'll be back, yeah, like I said, next week. Until then, have a good one.
Thanks for watching. Bye, everyone.
Can't stop the signal now.